So, let's start. How many of you were there in the morning for my talk? Excellent. How many of you still raised their hands, keep their hands up? Okay. How many of you keep your hands up if you have ever extended object or string or collection ever in your life? Excellent. Now, keep your hands up, please. Thank you. How many of you have ever extended the inspector? So, very few, right? I'm really happy that there are a couple that have done it. So, here's the point. Right? If you see value in customizing the language, why shouldn't you see value in customizing your tools? In most cases, you do see value in that, it's prohibitively expensive. The idea with the work on Glamour is to provide some sort of, to provide an abstraction that makes it easier, changes a bit the equation there. Now, this is the work, so what you see in a browser, that's the user interface. Glamour, primarily, is about the engine, the conceptual engine behind a user interface. So what I will do in this talk is actually I will not show you slides, too many. Instead, I will just sit down and give you all sorts of demos. If you want to see something else, just ask the question. If you don't understand something, ask a question. Okay? So the idea would be to have this one a bit more interactive. And I'll be simply starting to write code live. Okay? Great. So, let's start. So first of all, let's start with how we see browsers in Glamour. And the idea here is basically a browser is, as I said, is a specific user interface that is a specific, the browsers are a specific class of user interfaces that focus primarily on helping you navigate through data. Now there are two components there in a browser. First of all is how does data move? So what happens if I do some action here? How do I correlate two pieces of data? So the way the data flows through my browser. And the other one is, the other dimension is how is the data presented? Now, in Glamour, we want to distinguish between these two. Right? We don't put them all together. So, essentially, the main model of Glamour focuses primarily on, first of all, modeling the information flow, and afterwards, enabling you to customize the presentation that goes there. Now, let me remind you what we've done in the morning. So, this is the script that we use there. It's a simple script. We took all the annotations, annotation types from the model, and then what we've done there was we said we want two kinds of columns, one for the annotations, one for the entities, and when we start the browser, we want to transmit to the annotations the inputs, in this case all these annotations, and there we want to display a list, and then we'll display by default everything that we'll receive as an input. We will format it by showing only the name, then we will sort them all, and afterwards we want to link the two panes in a way that we take the output from the annotations or the selection from the annotations, we input it, we put it to the entities, and then when we get there we want to show a list, and in that pane, in that list, we will be showing all the annotated entities. So from an annotation type, we somehow can send a message annotated entities, and this will retrieve us another set of objects, and this will be displayed. Okay, so then in the end, we get this kind of interaction, right? So we have simply a very super simple browser. Now, let's draw this one. So now, to make this one simpler, we have a very simplistic visual language to help us understand and be able to draw. And I always recommend people, whenever they want to play with Glamour, start with a piece of paper and start drawing. Start drawing your browser first, and afterwards start coding it. So let's see. We have, in this case, we have two browsers. So I just simulate now that I'm drawing. I open the canvas over here. So I had two panes, right? The first one here is the annotations. That has an input and it has an output. And there's the entities one. It has an input and it has an output. And then there is this kind of transmission. There's the link between them. So we link the output, the selection of the annotations pane, and we link it to the entities pane, right? This is conceptually what's going on. Now, it so also happens that around the whole thing, we have the big thing, right? The input, the very first input when I'm opening the browser, I'm saying here are all the annotation types. And afterwards, by default, the first instruction says, well, when you get the value in the default input input pane, simply forward it to the one that goes inside. And that's what we've done. So if I go back, I say here, start on, this simply says populate this port with a certain value. Afterwards, we have two columns, that defines two panes. So we have one pane, second pane, and then we transmit from the default input to the annotations, this link, we created it, and afterwards we say transmit from annotations to entities, so we created this other one. And that's it, right? This is what we've built with our little script. Okay? Questions? Yes, there's a question.
How do you know the symbol name to use?
How do I know? So so the question is, how do you know what symbol names to use? The first one here on top, this is a declaration. I'm basically giving names to these kinds of panes. And afterwards, when I say transmit two annotations, these two must match. Okay? This is how I know. Other questions? Great, so we move on. Now, one other thing that we want to do now is that, let's say, in this case, you remember that we've created this little tiny visualization that did nothing but given a set of classes, displayed us hierarchy and showed us how many, if there is any hierarchy, it showed us first, and then how many annotations are there in each class. So, on the other hand, we have this in this browser here. If I click on a particular annotation, in this case pragma, it gives me a list of methods in here. Now let's first of all just say, okay, we don't want to show only the methods, we want to show the classes in which these methods reside. So we say collect a set, and then I say, okay, parent type. So now when I will go through it, I will see the classes in which these annotations are being used. Okay? Now, given that here I have a bunch of classes, well, I should be able to just display the same information not as a list now, but as a visualization. So I would like to now take the visualization that I defined in here. So I simply will copy everything. And I would somehow like to say, well, instead of when you're transmitting here from annotation to entities and saying, please show me a list, well, let's give this one the title, classes. I will say, well, okay, and now please also show me a Mondrian painting. And you will be given the view, and given each annotation, what I will do now is I just pasted here all the code that I copied from the other part. Now, if you see, the one thing that becomes red, which means it's not defined, is this reference to the class group. This was the variable, so I'm switching back. This was the variable that I provided to the whole script. Now, of course, I don't have here this variable, but I have the particular entity, I have the annotation in there. So if I say, well, from these annotations, please put here all the classes that are related to this particular annotation. I'll give this one a title as well. And if I execute this, and if I forget not to put the right amount of blocks, okay, something's wrong. Can anybody help me debug this thing? Let's write a debugger, exactly. Let me start over. It still didn't work out. So it says that there's a syntax error. So this is something that still needs to be improved. Ah, okay. It becomes too complicated. Okay. So I start over. Yes, ask questions in the meantime.
Can you call another script?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the question is, can you call another script from the script? And then, of course, you can call another script from the script. It's just, this is simply Smalltalk code, except that you have to have your method somewhere. If you put the method in some place, then you will be able to call the script from another script, and it's that easy. And what I'm showing here, so this particular editor that I'm showing here is simply only useful for rapid prototyping. It is not meant to be used for writing super duper production code. When you don't want to have super large methods in your code that can become rather complex. Instead, you will have every little piece that you see here is a separate method, and then you'll have a class for your browser. And then you'll start be able to compose them. Anyway, so I got something working here. So as you see now, there was a syntax problem that I didn't see. So as you see now, if I'm selecting now if I'm selecting an annotation, all of a sudden I have two ways of presenting it, right? I can either see now the class, the list of classes like I saw before, or now I'm seeing a list of hierarchies in which this class appears, right? So now I can simply build my browser in a different way, okay? And this is how things start to be able to be, you can start be able to combine them, to combine these kinds of information. But in the end, essentially, the structure of the browser did not change. So if we go back to this basically essentially remained the same. What happened only was that instead, in this second pane, we now have two presentations. So the red ones are presentations, okay? So the wiring of the browser is essentially boils down to four large concepts. The black thing here is called a pane. The little buttons here, these are called ports. So we have panes and then have ports. A pane simply is a physical place. It does not have a shape. And the ports are able to store any kinds of objects. Then these ports are being linked in some way to capture the information flow with these objects that are being called transmissions, right? These are the blue ones over here. And the transmissions can have all sorts of different kinds of semantics. There are not that many. But one of them, the essential part of a transmission is that it takes, every time the value changes in the origin port, the transmissions get triggered, and the value gets promoted to the target port. One other responsibility or possible responsibility of a transmission is to set, okay, now with this new piece of data, I want to also install a new rendering machinery, right? So when I said here, when I have this and show clause, this is what I'm saying. after this point, like all the block that comes after end show, is nothing but a description of the presentation of the piece of data, and nothing else. Okay? So this is the essence of Glamour. Are there questions? Okay, so let's go a bit on. But before we go on, I'd like to just browse a couple of browsers with you, if you may allow me. So first of all, I showed you this Moose panel. This is completely described in Glamour, with all these pieces of all the multiple views, all this navigation that is being provided by default, all the interaction of the menus that are available here on top. This is for every pane. Everything you see here is totally provided by Glamour. Now, one thing that you might not see is that, well, you know, this is a finder. So at some point, you might want to say, well, for some reason, we noticed that this is an interesting kind of annotation. And I would like to remember this particular state, this particular object. So now I will double click on it, and all of a sudden it creates me a new tab over here. And I can just continue doing what I want to do in the previous one, and the old one remains like I wanted it. So this is kind of simulates the Eclipse style of working. So every time you see something interesting, boom, it pops up. It pops up a new tab. Okay, this is one browser. Another browser that is interesting in Moose is as I said, you know, these annotations that I showed you, like these MSC properties, MSC comment, and so on, they get reified. We get to create another kind of model, a meta described by a meta model. So it parallels the Smalltalk hierarchy, and for that purpose, we want to have a special browser, right? So if I just open the regular browser and I go to, let's say, FAMX type. This one represents a type in an object-oriented systems, right? Then I see, look here, this is the attributes of variable or property, and this is meta-described like this. Now, what this will happen in the end is that I will have a FAMX, I will have a type object somewhere, and it will have a property attributes. And this can be browsable with a dedicated kind of browser. So this is where the Moose meta browser is. It was something that we needed to for our own development. And so here's what it happens. So basically now what you see here below, this is a map of the complete hierarchy. And here I can browse it on top, and I can just go on and say, okay, here is type, and here is attributes. And now what you see here, this is because this is it's a typed model. So that means that attributes will be a collection of attributes in here. And I have this information. And because I have this information, all of a sudden I can also draw here the edge and say, well, it actually points to this one over here. And if I click here below, it jumps there. And if I click here below, it jumps again back to the type. And it's highly interactive. This is all described in Glamour. Questions? And by the way, these MSC comments and pragmas that I said that we need, it gets rendered over here. So that's why if we don't have it, then this browser does not show the help that is needed. Okay, so that's a totally different kind of browser than the Moose panel that you showed, right? Now let's take a look at another one. This is a Glamour browser as well. It has 3 panes, 1, 2, 3, and every time I press here this button or I press the shortcut associated with it, it generates another one here. It generates a new picture. And this is again described completely in Glamour. The coolest thing is that this is also a Glamour browser. So this is the editor. This is the editor with which we can edit Glamour. We can edit Glamour source scripts, and it creates a Glamour browser at runtime, and this is what gets displayed here on top. And this is another example of a Glamour browser. In fact, the two that you saw, the Mondrian editor one and the Glamour editor one, they are pretty much similar. So they even share the same kind of implementation. Okay, yes, question? No, just say, and I repeat it, it's okay.
It's very good for prototyping, but does that contradict that you're actually getting a production system written in Glamour?
No, it doesn't. As long as the code becomes still 50 lines of code, then it doesn't contradict anything.
The next same question is, what is the maintainability of this code? Is it easy to maintain because it's kind of script?
The question is, what is the maintainability? Because this is kind of a script, and so it doesn't work that well. And thanks for the question. And now what I will do is I will just show you another one. And in this case, up to now, I showed you tools that are somehow specific, maybe can be considered specific to Moose. But what about, having tools that are not specific to Moose? How about the Smalltalk inspector? So let me say, well, I have here Smalltalk, the object, and now I want to inspect it, right? If I inspect it with the regular inspector, here it is, right? That's the regular one. But then I inspect it with the Explorer, and I have a slightly different kind of a browser. So this one actually follows the same principle as the Moose panel one. So essentially, here I'm displaying all the variables and values of the dictionary. Now I'm selecting all the globals, and all of a sudden, boom! Because this is a system dictionary, it has also yet another view presented here. So I can also now navigate. This collection or this dictionary by looking and listing all its components. So, for example, the Moose Senders browser is one of the entries. It has a key and a value. That's an association if I clicked on it. And then I can get the value of it. And then that's the class now. And then the class has, well, in this case it has methods, but it's not so important. So let's say, and now I want to say, okay, I want now to say with all superclasses. Okay, this is a class, so I should be able to print that, right? Here it is. I can also inspect that if I want, so I see that I have 4 different things over here. But now, what if I would like to stay in the same pane? In the same browser. It would be very interesting if somehow I could do it such that the result of evaluating this piece of code does not necessarily open it another window, but just another pane. So then I can actually do it and open it, and I get the result on the right-hand side. So we can embed, there are multiple we can embed a complex kind of a workflow directly in one single browser. So the original question was, how maintainable is this? And given that you have probably a super large script that does all this complicated behavior, so how complex is it? Now, let me just go and browse that. So I'll just browse the browser is called GT Inspector, and that's the code. Okay, there are a couple of helper methods over here, but it's not necessarily where the behavior happens. Most of the things happen in this logic. What happens here, I'm not going to go into all the details at this moment, but what happens here is that we are dispatching to each object to say, well, tell me what you want to display in each pane. And if I go and browse this particular method, then I will see, well, you can actually start being able, you can actually start using your own pragma. So you can simply extend your object with the new method. So let's take a look at the senders now of this pragma. So, for example, I was showing you collection. And this is a slightly more complex, this is probably the most complex part that we have. So to display all the items of the collection in one presentation. But then everything else is distributed, and this is the complete source code of the inspector browser, with multiple kinds of specialization based on each object. In fact, if you total it, it has under 200 lines of code. Okay? So this is what can happen if you have a different kind of an abstraction. So it's a higher level abstraction. That is why we say browsers are user interfaces, but they are very specific, and they can benefit from a dedicated infrastructure that is dedicated to building a browser. So in Glamour, you're never going to place a button anywhere. You will only describe information flows and presentations in general. You can, if you must, you can, if you insist, you can start placing a button. But the general philosophy is that placing a button should come with a license. You know, it's just like we don't allow everyone to drive on the street, it's the same with buttons. We should not allow everyone to place buttons, because then, you know, all sorts of things happen. Okay, so now what I will want to do is I would like to take this code. So I'll go back to Moose, and the way we get the information about our meta description, so we'll just try to build a small browser for our meta descriptions. So the way we get this information is simply asking Moose model meta. This is a global variable. We have two global variables in Moose. This is the second one. And this is basically something called a repository. In this repository, you can ask for the classes here, and you get the classes, or you can, for a class, you can ask for its attributes, right? So we can build something very simple in this way. So I already have here a small script that will open me an editor, a glamorous editor. So I'll have a variable called meta that will hold the information that I need. So what I want to do at the moment, I just want to show all the classes on the left-hand side, and if I click on one, I show all the attributes, all its attributes on the right-hand side. So I'll just do a tabulator with a T. I will open the whole thing on meta, right? So I forgot. So basically, I still want the same thing as here, right? Except for this, I want to have the same pieces of information. Still the same, very simple structure. Okay? So I have to create two columns now. I have to put something in here, show a list, and then with the output of here, move it there, and then show another list over there. Okay? This is what I want to do. So, can somebody dictate what I should write in here? Okay, we just name them, right, at the moment, and then we create another column. We call them attributes, right, because we're not talking about methods at the moment. So, and now I want to start, and by default I want to put something in the first pane. So I say transmit to classes, and when you get there, show me. Now this is actually an object, so some other people like to call them a presenter or a composer. It doesn't matter. I like to call it because it's meant to be used as a sentence. If you take away all the small talk from it, basically says composer transmit to classes and show a list, and in that list display. So it's given M, display M classes, right? Something like this. So if I execute this, somebody does not understand something. What? Whoa, could anybody tell me what's wrong here? So now I'm confused. Composer column. Sorry. Okay, so I have my list of I have my list of classes in there, right? Okay, nothing fancy. Let's format this quickly. Okay, we have our names. Fine. And now we say, okay, transmit. We want to link the two, right? We want to draw the second blue edge now. So take the output from classes, the selection, and then push it to the attributes, and when you get there, show me a list, and in that list, please display attributes. Okay, and then, okay, let's format this by name. Okay. Okay, so nothing fancy. Okay, just something very simple. Now, one thing that we can do here is we can start adding an action to our browser. So let's see, we want to inspect this one. We want to be able to inspect this particular one. So we say, okay, so you're showing me a list here, but okay, show me selection act, for example, given that I'll give you a list and list selection inspect or explore, and in there we say explore. So if I execute this now, then I should be able to right click on this and say explore, right? And if I explore, then it will open me the regular explorer. Now let's see a bit here. Let's take another one that's maybe more interesting. Let's take class. Right. So we have source code anchor element. Now one thing, if you look over here, we say, well, we have this notion of an opposite. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, but essentially what this will happen, what this will make is it will point to another property of another class. Okay? This is just some information that I have. Again, it's not so important. But essentially what I want now to do is, now given that here I have a type and I know what type this element is, I want that if I, let's say, maybe if I say Apple O, on this particular one, if I execute a certain action, I want now to jump to that particular type. So I want to now create basically an interaction that is kind of circular. Okay? Are we on the right track? So who's with me? Okay, do you have a question? Yes, question.
Can you sort the classes, class names from the first? Are you able
if I can search through them.
Sort them.
Sort them, yes, of course I can. So like this, you know. This is what you meant. So now I say, okay, another clause there, X name, Y name, like that. Right, this was it. But then another possibility to do exactly the same thing would have been to do it like this. I mean, this here is just, it's the same thing. Because here it's a block. It's a transformation that given M returns me another object. And then this is it. And it's the same result that I have. Okay, now we go back. So we said we have this, so attributes has a type. And now I would like to show, if I would like to double click on it and then get me to the attribute instance. So how to do that? So I'll add here another selection action. So selection act, given the list. Now, given the list selection, and this one has a type, what I need now is I'm a bit in trouble. So I have to go back and write, draw something, because that's my tool. So you see, this one has a selection too, right? So at the moment, every time I'm selecting something in the list, this will have a value in here. So essentially what I kind of need to do is something like this. I would need to go in here and link these two somehow. The question is not this one? Well, it's not this one, because this one here will define what gets displayed. We don't want to modify the amount of classes, we simply want to change what gets selected. So I said, if I know that from a type I select attributes, the attributes will have a type attribute, and now I just want to double click or click on that and then say jump to attribute. Just jump to another place in the original list. Right? So this is what I need. I have the information here outside of my pane where I'm working, and now I want to push it over there. Okay? Okay, so how do I do that? Well, this is where we have this something called, this is what we have this idea of populate. Oh, no, sorry. My bad. So, yeah. When we instead of, yeah, we just say to select, we just give it a name on O, open, then here I will say, okay, given this, basically here I'm saying that if I want another pane in here, I want another something, I want another value in here, then if I click on that, then what we'll do is we'll put a value. So right now I obtained my value in this port that I wanted. Now I just need to draw this one, this edge in here. So let me go back. And so here I'll say T transmit from attributes port to select to annotate classes port selection. That's the default selection port. Let's see if that worked out. So I have this, and if I say open, it jumped. And if I say open, it jumps. And if I say open, it jumps. Okay? And everything else kind of works, right? It does exactly what I'm expecting to do. I just modeled now a rather complex behavior with circular kind of dependencies. And a lot of the problems were completely taken away by the original engine, by the engine. Okay? So on the one hand, Glamour limits you in what you can do, but on the other hand, it really focuses on capturing the domain. So it offers you some sort of kind of metaphors that you can start to use. Now, questions? We just have a final demo to do. Yes? Yes, here.
You're showing us two words, one in which you graphically design your browser, and another one in which you script your small code.
Yes.
That would be nice to have a graphical...
The question is, if it would be really cool to draw, to generate the script from the picture that I'm drawing here, the answer is absolutely. And I have to remind you that the project is totally open source, the license is MIT, and we are looking for contributors. Thank you. Next question.
Maybe it's a basic question, but I don't get it. How do you know use attributes or classes, or those are the methods that you are going to code to?
No, these are not methods. These are the names that we're using over here, right? So we said classes are these. This pane is called classes. This pane is called attributes.
But how do you show the attributes when you say that this is attributes?
So what I'm showing the attributes is here. I'm saying this is maybe the confusing part. So this one actually is a block here. So here it says, given a certain class, show me, display the attributes of that class. So it's inside here. So there is one thing that's going on in the wiring part, and then the other part is what's getting displayed inside. Yes, one final question, I have to move on.
You're using some not default ports.
Exactly, I'm not default.
Is there any documentation or list which are all the ports you can use?
There is no old ports. Ports are created dynamically. So at the moment when I did this, a new port got created.
But the selection port is there?
The selection port is populated by default by the presentation.
Okay, so each presentation
Will have its own ports that will do. Usually for defaulting, the selection one is typically populated by kind of all presentations, except for some, like the text. Okay. So I want to do one final step. So I have a browser that I kind of like, and what I would like now, I would like to embed this browser in the inspector, such that when I will inspect my meta repository, I will have this new way of looking at the piece of data, right? So if I'm here in the Moose model meta, and if I'm inspected this, all I see is its state and the methods that I can call, right? By the way, you can have a complete nice code browser that is associated with this object. But what I would like a new tab over here showing me the browser that I just created now, because it's more appropriate for what I want. So, right, let me just go again here, and now I say let's go browse this one. So I open the class associated with this object, and what I'll do, I'll just add an extension. So in this case, it will be GT meta in composer, and then I say, well, okay, I just have to add a new pragma, and now I'm pasting all the code that I wrote in my little in my editor, and I'm just pasting it there. I just have to say that it should open on self, and now, ideally, when I go and inspect Moose model meta, I should have a new tab over here. Okay, so I forgot to put the title. So let's say T title meta. So I forgot the dot. Let me inspect this again. I have a new tab called meta, and in here I have my little browser. Right? And then everything else works just in the same way. So this is in short what Glamour does and what Glamour is. You can find more information about it on the website. So on the Moose book, so there's a larger chapter written about it. So the moosebook.org/book internals Glamour. It basically looks like this. This is one chapter, and then you can start browsing it. And what I want you not to forget, as I said, is that Glamour is an open source project. One thing that you might want to know is the size of the model. This is the size of the model. I'm not going to go into the details. It's explained a bit more in the chapter. But the essence is that we have about 50 classes. In total, you don't see all of them over here. And the core model has about 3,000 lines of code. Now, this does not include anything related to rendering. The rendering is done in a different way. And we're looking for people that are interested in building or providing effort towards building renderers for Morphic, building renderers for web. We have solutions for Morphic. We have some solutions for the web based on Seaside. If other people would like to provide other kinds of rendering, we'll be happy. Or if there would be other kinds of user interfaces, user interface frameworks that people might want to support, we'd be very, very happy. So thank you very much. And I guess the best thing would be if you catch me in the break. So thank you.